Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have I'll say, groundbreaking presentation for you tonight. And it's going to be delivered by a combination of Dr. Roger Lear and Steve Colburn. Dr. Lear is a doctor of podiatric medicine. He started his work with alien implants in the late 80s, so it's come a ways. And I kind of think of Dr. Lear as a pioneer, like you think of Lewis and Clark or Columbus. Here's a man who's willing to stake his reputation and step out of line and investigate something that most people don't want to talk about, and if they are talking about it, usually they're pointing a finger and laughing. There's a lot of ridicule involved in this field, so when you stick your neck out, you're really sticking your neck out and everything's on the line. So I have to applaud Dr. Lear for the work he's done so far, and I think you guys are going to agree that by the time the presentation is over, you'll be duly impressed. His credentials, a Bachelor of Science and a Doctor of Podiatric Medicine. He's the author of 7 books that he has available there on the table. He studied the Virginia case down in Brazil and wrote about that. He's an international lecturer in 42 countries. Multiple appearances on radio, TV, and motion pictures. He's been on coast to coast. He's been all over the place. He's performed 16 surgeries for removal of suggested alien implants from abductees. He is the president of ANS Research, a 5013C nonprofit scientific organization. So if any of you are donors out there, I'm sure he'd be very happy to have you help him with his research. We're also going to hear from Steve Colburn. He has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from UCLA. That's for you Bruins out there. He has 20 years of experience in materials sciences and studies, and presently he is working in the field of carbon nanotube technology. He's a holder of several innovative patents in carbon nanotubes and ceramic research. He's analyzed several of the implants removed by Dr. Lear. He does not work directly for Dr. Lear. He is employed by a physical sciences lab, but he prefers to keep that anonymous for now. He is board member and chief scientist of ANS Research. With that, I want you to please give a warm welcome to Dr. Lear and Steve Colburn as they present.
Thank you, Steve. I'm kind of slow because I'm old. And the older you get, the slower you get. Anyway, I've been involved in this subject for quite some few years now. In fact, when I started, Walt Andrus was fairly young. How many remember Walt Andrus? He was the national leader for many years of MUFON. The first MUFON meeting I went to, I was invited by a friend. I didn't know what MUFON stood for, I guess I should say. And they said, oh, Mutual UFO Network. And I said, this has something to do with UFOs? Yes, yes, yes. Come and enjoy the meeting. It's only $5, and there's fresh baked cookies. Now, how can you go wrong with a night with lectures on an interesting topic, something to drink that's warm, and home-baked chocolate chip cookies? So a heck of a deal, and the cookies were so good, and the lecture was so good, I came back a second time, and then a third, and then a fourth, and then I joined the local region, which at that time was in existence, and that's the Ventura Santa Barbara MUFON group. And when I joined that, I became active, and I was writing some material for the local periodical, let's call it a periodical that we have. And at the time, the name of the periodical was Swamp Gas. I didn't like that, so I was influential in getting it changed to The Vortex. And I would attend various meetings and conferences and listen to the speakers, and then I would write it up the way I saw it. Some people didn't like what I wrote, others did. But I wrote, used the pen from my heart. And then an evolution occurred, and I got started with the implant stuff. I became a state section director and was such for approximately 7 years. So I'm well grounded with the base of MUFON, and I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, I'm very happy that as many of you came that I see here tonight. Now, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because the lights are so bright I can't see you out there, but I'll try. I always like to know a little bit about whom I'm talking to, so I'd like to see a show of hands for, oh, that's good, wonderful. You just ask for it, let there be light, it happens. We're in a church, too. It's like a miracle. Anyway, how many have seen an unidentified flying object? That's certainly a majority. How many believe that they have had any relationship to the abduction phenomena? Wow. That's a heavy, heavy number. How many believe they've been abducted and never returned? Okay. All right. The frivolity is over with. Now we'll do a little bit of business and then we'll get started with the topic at hand. As Steve read to you, I've been busy doing various things. I got so busy with radio and television and motion pictures. Most of you don't know that I was in the last Race to Witch Mountain movie by Walt Disney. No, I was not an alien. The part that I played was me. So anyway, if you have a home copy of that, look for me with a lot of depth because I'm hard to see. But I'm there. I took a shot at producing a documentary. It's 90 minutes long. We haven't promoted it. We haven't done anything with it because we're waiting to see what the best market is for it. And so I have some people working on that. But it poses the question, when you see television programming particularly, and they do the program, why is it that in the field of ufology, there's always debunkers, skeptics, and lies, where in other parts of the paranormal subject, you don't find these things. For example, to step out of character for a minute, if anything, did you ever see a television program on the subject of God that was debunked? I never have. So I guess everybody has seen God, and we felt him and touched him and everything else. But when it comes to UFOs and aliens, there's always those people we know that are famous debunkers. And we've used actors in here. So if you happen to get one of these, why, you'll see who we're trying to portray. This is a brand new television show. I'm not sure it's even aired yet. It's with Lynn Marzulli, and it's called The Watchers. So I have a few of these if you are so inclined. Anything that you purchase or get from us that money goes directly recycled into the research. And we have performed 16 surgeries to date for removal of objects from individuals who allege alien abduction. And we've subjected these objects to very intrinsic academic studies with the scientists. Now, ANS Research has a full science advisory board. The gentleman that you'll be hearing from soon, Steve Colburn, is our chief scientist. We have several PhDs, and we have physicians of various specialties that all work together for the same goal. These are all interested and very dedicated people. So it's grown from just myself to a lot of academic and medical help, and I really do appreciate other people who have genuine academic degrees that are willing to stick their neck out, so to speak, and have them chopped off. I did a presentation in Washington, D.C. in 2009 at the National Press Club. I got to know Ed Mitchell quite well, and we both stood there at the podium. We had a large crowd of television and other correspondents, print media correspondents. I would say about 20% of what Ed Mitchell had to say got out, and about 1% of what I had to say got out. So if you think there's an embargo by the news media on this subject, I'd have to say you are absolutely correct. But we go ahead and we go forward, and we try and get out the knowledge as best as we can through media, various forms of media, television and otherwise. And the information, what am I doing this for? I'm sure not doing it to make myself healthier. I'm not doing it to make money because it's just the opposite. We've expended a large amount of money, and part of it was mine, and it's gone. I'll never get it back. So I kind of eke out a living, supporting my wife and the daughter at the present time, who just finished cosmetology school and is working in a salon in Thousand Oaks called Entourage. There's a plug for her. So if you need your fingernails done or your hair done, why, you can say, well, his daughter is a UFO guy, and then they won't let you in the door, the price will double. But to go on, I want to try and keep this as light as I possibly can, because we're talking about a very, very serious subject, and I promise not to show you anything that's going to make you ill. So we're going to talk about the 15th and 16th cases that we've done. I'm going to go through the cases in general. I'm going to tell you what they are. I'll tell you a little bit about the abduction scenario. I will tell you what we took out and what we found so far. All the testing is, and you should consider it that, is ongoing. So if we have funds, the more tests we can do. Do I have more people waiting to get this done? Yes, I do. So again, it's totally dependent on funds. My website, incidentally, is alienscalpel.com. If you haven't seen it, please go there, because it's more than the subject of alien implants. We include anything that we deem is scientific, as you would find in academic science, and if it relates to the UFO phenomena, even in a general way, we put it up on site. Someone told me that we have changed the material on the site more rapidly than any other site that's pertaining to the same subject. So take a look, alienscalpel.com. Now, the 15th case was an individual who came to my office with a chief complaint of pain in the second toe, and he said that he might have a foreign object in the toe. He didn't say he was an abductee. He didn't ask me if I saw a UFO. He didn't tell me he saw a UFO. I thought he was just a regular old patient right off the street with a foreign body. So as a prudent physician would do, we took an x-ray, and the x-ray did show what appeared to be a metallic foreign body in the second toe. So after showing him the x-rays on the second visit, he began to tell me something about how he got this in his foot. And he said he woke up with it, and it was there in the morning. There was a few drops of blood on the bed sheet, maybe a drop or two on the toe, and there was no particular sign of anything that had punctured his foot. And when he got up and stepped on it, it hurt like the devil. So he said, I might have something in there. So he looked me up and decided to pay me a visit. So there we have it, the patient, the toe, metallic foreign object, and so we set it up so that he would undergo removal of this object. And all the cases that I do go through a very strict set of protocols. You just don't walk in off the street like this gentleman did. John Smith is the patient, which is a pseudonym. You just don't walk into my office and expect to have a surgical removal of one of these objects. It usually just doesn't happen. He did it, and he did it in such a way that he got the job done. But the protocols and everything we use, the patient must show me that they have a foreign object, usually in an X-ray or a CAT scan, and then they have to fill out a large questionnaire with the references to the subject of ufology, indicating what their involvement is. We do then physical examinations, psychological examinations, and determine if the patient's well enough to undergo an extraction, and they have to, of course, decide whether they want it out or whether they don't. Now, there are people that are walking around that have objects in their body, which we believe are implants, that do not want them out. And so we will never talk anybody into removing anything. We just don't do it. When we started doing this, we did not allow any hypnotic regressions to occur prior to the time that the surgery was done, and the primary reason for that is that we did not want the criticism, not that it's wrong. Now, in the last few cases, if someone requests to undergo hypnotic regression, we send them to Yvonne Smith, who is trained by Bud Hopkins, and she's been doing this for a number of years, and she will do most of the work. All our surgeries are filmed on video. We have professional writers there that will write about it, and we have eyewitnesses. There's a certain amount of people that would like to be there and become an eyewitness. We have them sign a witness release form attesting to the fact that they viewed the surgery and it was real. So if you have any interest and you know that we're going to do another surgery, please get in touch with me. And if we have the room, why, we will let you in. Now, sometimes we have patients that sit in the waiting room and watch this on closed-circuit TV because we can't have a big crowd in the operating room. Anyway, let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, is this the magic lantern, or is there something? Oh, I guess I'm supposed to push something here. Yeah, okay. Is it over here? Oh, magic. This is better than operating a UFO. Number 15, the patient's name, pseudonym we're using is John Smith. John is 47 years of age at the time we did this. He's married with 3 children. He lives in the Southern California area. That's as close as I'm going to get to telling you the exact place. He happens to be a physical scientist, and that came as another big surprise. He had a positive alien abduction history. The whole gamut of it. We don't have time to really get into that subject tonight, but you know, when you hear stories of light that penetrates the room in the middle of the night and you're floating off of your bed and wind up in a craft with some weird looking fella doing something to you, he underwent all those things. He even had the audacity to fly one of these craft and one of these experiences. Maybe that's because he's of the research world and academic science. I don't know. We don't hear. I've heard a few other cases where the abductee was allowed to operate the craft, but it's not that often. The object was in the second toe of the left foot. We took an X-ray, and as I told you, it was positive. We saw it there. And then we do CAT scan. Now, why do we do a CAT scan if we already have the object on an X-ray? Because we want to know as much about the object before it comes out as possible. And one of those things that we want to know is its exact location. because this is not exactly a fishing expedition where you're going to open the body and search for 2 hours, looking for a tiny object which may be only 6 to 10 millimeters long and about as thick as a pencil lead. And we have about 8 of these now that are so identical, you would think that they were probably made by the same manufacturer. And I already gave you here a little clue of the approximate size of John Smith's was 3 to 5 millimeters. It was radio dense, and as I stated, second toe of the left foot. The duration of how long it's been there was since February the 28th, 2008. Now, it's certainly not in every case where we know how long the object has been there. The oldest one we had was in the body for 46 years. And that's because of another relative incident that happened so that the individual had a distinct memory of where he may have gotten the object. John Smith had this same memory, as I told you, because he remembers waking up in the morning following a night of a rather bizarre dream, and he noticed the blood and so on. So that's the date, February the 28th of 2008. Was there any scar? No, there's never any scar. There's no visible portal of entry. We just don't see it. It's not there. When we examine the patient in the office before any surgery is done, we like to know as much as possible about the object and what it's possibly doing. So we use various instruments to try and ascertain certain scientific aspects. For example, is it putting out an electromagnetic field? Is there a magnetic field involved? So we can simply use, for example, a very simple thing, which is a stud finder. One of those things you go up and down the wall looking for a nail. And some of the newer stud finders, you remember the old ones with the little magnet in it and it flipped over, if anybody does carpentry. Now they're a little more sophisticated, they're electronic, and there's an arrow that comes up and it points right to the object where the nail is in the wall. Well, we use that, and we can locate the object in the toe. We check with a Gauss meter, and the Gauss meter will tell us about electromagnetic radiation. Now, this gentleman's was registering 10 milligauss. That's a pretty good whopping strength for an electromagnetic field. We have a Geiger counter, small handheld Geiger counter. We use it. We found none so far that were emitting any kind of radioactivity. Radio emissions, yes. A long time ago when I started doing this, we're not looking for radio emissions, and one of the reasons was we didn't have the equipment. But now we do, and one of the things that I am still lacking, and it's about a $10,000 piece of equipment, is an instrument in which we could capture the radio wave and then study it as a lower date. So maybe someday along the line someone would want to donate one of those to us and we can learn even more. The frequencies detected in this individual was 14,707 megahertz and 17,686 gigahertz. So there are two different frequencies depending upon the scale that you're using, shortening this down. So we found about half a dozen of these so far that are emitting radio emissions. One of these I was able to go through Bigelow Aerospace, which was formerly National Institute for Discovery Science. And Bob Bigelow was kind enough to support the publishing of my first book in this field. He felt it was quite important. Now he's totally into aerospace, and although he has another organization called BASS, he's really more into the aerospace part than the UFO part. Now, besides the object itself, we want to know more about the client, so we go to their house and we start looking at a few things. He lives in a single-story, typical California dwelling with stucco walls on the outside and over chicken wire probably or wallboard. And it's typical Southern California building. Interior is plaster over a wallboard, so nothing unusual about the house. Exterior, we found magnetic anomalies in various places. I think we have a chart here we're going to show you that you'll be able to see it also. Below the master bedroom window, below and above one of the quarters of the window, we found a large magnetic anomaly, electromagnetic field. One of the things I've never seen before, in his backyard he has a nice, well-endowed avocado tree, and it bears fruit. And we set the Gauss meter on a branch of the avocado tree, and it pegged on 10 milligauss. Now that's one heck of a whopping large magnetic field, even for an avocado tree. I would be very leery, pardon the pun, of wanting to eat one of those avocados, wouldn't you? That would be guacamole from somewhere. Surrounding the tree, trees grow other places than in Brooklyn, but they don't usually grow out of your living room or out of the carpet. They grow in soil. And the soil on various spots in this backyard undergo spontaneous combustion. So when you see soil that suddenly catches on fire, what's the first thing you think of? Somebody? Gas leak, right. So we made sure there was no kind of gas leak and those things that normally do this. And then we sent the soil in for some analysis, and it turned out to be high in bromine. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, high in bromine. And he had a fiberglass boat in the driveway. I have never seen a magnetic boat. I just can't help thinking that maybe this was the Love Boat. A very magnetic personality. Yeah, anywhere you put the Gauss meter on this boat, on the hull or the wood or anything, why, it was magnetized. Cadillac, automobile, first thing I checked the tires. They had magnetic fields, but then you scratch your head and you think, well, these are, these are radial tires with the steel belts, so maybe that's normal. But then on the plastic parts of the car, we have plastic in cars today, in case you didn't know or never been in an accident. And the plastic is also magnetized. Sensitive little thing, L.A. Muffin. This is a picture of the exterior of the house, and as you can see, it's about as I described, wood siding rather, over some plasterboard. Again, another picture, typical Southern California construction. There's one of the yards. Let's go back. There's the boat I was telling you about, a magnetic love boat. And there's the famous magnetic avocado tree with its rather attractive personality and soil that catches fire. See, it's a big tree. Another shot of it. There's a map of the diagram of the home, and I don't know how well you can see this, but we've made a little map with magnetic anomalies. We use an ultraviolet light also. We look at various places around the whole house. Now, there was a lot of magnetic anomalies in the kitchen area. The drain boards were magnetic. All the utensils in the drawers, both metallic and non-metallic, were magnetized, including wooden and plastic salad spoon and fork. Now, either they eat a lot of magnetic lettuce or there's something strange. So we found also some magnetic anomalies involving hinges and indications that there was a unipole. Do you all know what a unipole is? Well, magnetically everything has like a north pole and a south pole. But when you find that there's only one pole, that's called a unipole, and these supposedly don't exist, but I've seen it in several abductee houses. Also, one of the most important things that we found in use of the ultraviolet light, we have a light with 3 different kinds of ultraviolet frequencies. And each frequency of ultraviolet will show up different things, so to speak. Now, remember I told you that on the wall of the bedroom on the outside we found some magnetic anomalies above and below the window. Well, in the same room, on the inside, we found more magnetic anomalies in the same spot. So then we shut off the room lights and we turned on the ultraviolet light, and guess what we found? Anybody want to guess? Doesn't cost you anything. Spots. That's close. Close. Anybody else? Phosphorescence. Yeah, phosphorescence what? You got it. That's a good question, and he asks what is the time element involved between the time of the abduction scenario and the time that we did the examination of the house. This happens to be an ongoing case, so I can't answer the question because there's stuff that's still going on. So I don't know. We don't know how long the fingerprints were there or how long the magnetic anomalies there. We have no baseline to go by because it's a continuing case. I have many cases that continue, and it's hard to nail down time. But we found these 2 small childlike fingerprints which appeared using the ultraviolet light. There's another view. Maybe you can see it a little bit better. If the room was darker, you'd be able to see it better. We removed that piece of the wall, and we wanted to find out some more information on it. And we sent it to a feller in Phoenix, Arizona, and he was supposed to have some work done on it, and didn't do anything. And in fact, he still has it, and we're still fighting to get it back. I won't mention names. There's the X-ray, and you can see the object in the second toe. Let me get my illuminator out here. Okay, usually you take these things out, and they're gone. You know, you put them and we protect them by putting them in a solution of the patient's own blood serum. We remove blood prior to the surgery, and then it's spun down and the liquid is taken off, and that makes the serum, or the liquid portion of the blood. Then we immerse the object in that, and so far most of them has been as happy as a clam. Never had a problem. This case, again, was different because as we were removing the object, it started coming apart in pieces. Small particles, let's say of a medium tone, on a gray scale would be a medium gray. And so we very carefully put all these pieces into a container, including some areas of soft surrounding tissue. And then when this is all done, we seal them into a vial, and that's the way they stay until they go to a laboratory. This case was filmed by Original Productions, which is not too far from here, actually. And it was going to be the major subject of a program called Alien Intent. Did any of you see Alien Intent? Not surprising, because it sat in a can for over a year, and it was supposed to be shown on A&E. And it was never shown and never shown and never shown. And then finally, an abbreviated 1/2 hour version was shown on the Biography channel, which appeared one time. And it got a tremendously high rating. And it didn't appear on the television guides. It just sort of popped up. But there was no debunkers and no skeptics. Whitley Strieber was in it. He's the one that really designed the show and put it together. We showed the complete surgical footage from the removal of John Smith's object and what it did in the lab and what our findings were. It was one of the best things that was ever done on this subject ever. And again, there was never any repeat broadcast, called Alien Intent. So if you ever happen to see it, because some of these production companies, or when they're given over to a network, they'll keep it for a while and then they'll sell it to somebody else. So, and sometimes they can even change the name. That's why people come up to me and say, "Oh, we saw you on the History Channel the other night, and you were in that show with all the mountains." Scratch my head and say, "What mountains was that? I don't remember being in any mountains." Well, they take pieces of one and they put it together with another one, and it's just incredible what Hollywood does. Get this, and you'll learn the secrets. Anyway, we keep these refrigerated, and when I pulled this out to take a look and see how it was doing, after 48 hours, I was absolutely shocked, bowled over, amazed. Any description you want to give to it, any adjective will work. The objects, the little pieces that we took out, number one, changed the color. They became dark. I mean, really dark, like on a grayscale, almost black. And then they looked like they started to reassemble, because here we had all these little pieces just, settling to the bottom of the cup, and you could shake this thing up in the liquid, and they would all slowly reassemble in order. I mean, it's the weirdest thing that I've ever seen. Now, which brings me to a point that I have to tell you one other strange thing that happened during the surgery. We use a device called a C-arm. And a C-arm is an X-ray device in which you can watch what you're doing on 2 television screens. So you can actually put in an instrument and you can look around and get the object and then clamp it, you hope, and get it and take it out. And it saves a lot of time. When we had just almost finished the surgery, there was one little piece left. So we put everything out on this sponge where we laid it out, it's a gauze square, and we said, let's go in and get that last piece. And we looked for it, we decided, well, let's hit it with the C-arm. So we looked at the picture, and it takes, we can rotate it around. It can go 360 degrees. The piece was gone. I don't mean it was hidden. I don't mean it got removed by accident. It was gone. And we have this on video. So this is not some story that you hear at Halloween. We don't know where these went. There was many, many, many strange events that happened with this case. On one day of shooting, we were supposed to do the CAT scan, and they were going to film that all being done and so on. And the individual was, John Smith was coming to the office going through a small mountain region. And we got a call from him. He was running late, so he called and said, my car broke down. And what happened, to make a long story short, was a part of his electrical system got fried in the middle of the canyon, the Cadillac. So we had to physically go and rescue this guy, and the whole television crew went, and we filmed all that too. But during this time that he was gone, I had his x-rays sitting on a pile, let's use the right exact term, sitting in a pile of x-rays. about maybe the third or the fourth one down in an envelope. You know, one of those envelopes you get at the hospital, you know, the brown looking thing. And it's got the writing on the outside. It says, you know, x-rays, patient's name, date, you know, diagnosis, so on. It had the writing on the envelope. So it's laying in a pile, and it's in the middle of the pile. It's not on the top of the pile. It's not on the bottom. It's in the middle. So I pull out the x-rays and I take them out of the envelope and we hold them up to the view box, and all the writing that's on the outside of the envelope is now imprinted on the film. Now, when a film is developed, even the most modern processes, it still goes through the same thing. You have silver salts, and then it's exposed to radiation, and these silver salts have to be washed out and fixed in a fixative solution. When that process is done, it's finished. You can't put anything out. It's not like digital photography where you can add something. You don't add anything to an already developed x-ray that's been sitting there for a matter of weeks. We went to several radiologists and asked for an opinion, and they came up with the same answer. It's impossible. So I just tell you that because there was a number of strange things that happened. We did pathology reports, and there was absolutely, as we've seen with these other objects, no immune response. There was no inflammation. We haven't seen any inflammatory response or rejection in any of the objects that we've removed, including this case. Also, you find that there are some specialized nerve bundles that are seen in the area. Some of these are what we call proprioceptors. They're usually in places like the fingertips and so on. So the mechanism of the hand, you can pick something up, a glass. There's not too much muscle tension, and you don't squeeze and break the glass. So there's pressure receptors, there's temperature receptors. These are all what we call classified neurologically as proprioceptors. What in the heck would a proprioceptor be doing down next to the bone and a foot and a toe? I mean, we do have some proprioception on the very bottom of the foot, otherwise you wouldn't have the ability to walk. These messages have to be sent through the spinal cord, through the brain, and then back to the muscles so that one muscle knows when to contract and the other one knows how to relax. So, but you don't find proprioceptors down near bone, and most of these objects that we remove are all, I should say all of them, all near bone. So lack of any inflammatory response and specialized nerve endings. Okay, these are some of the optical microscopy findings, and we're going to save these, because Steve is going to tell you by far more about them than I would ever be able to. And we'll let him tell you about the conclusions, since he is a scientist. I don't consider myself a scientist. We'll go right on to surgery number 16. This gentleman does not have an alias, but he has no problem using his name. His name is Noel, and he lives in the state of Tennessee. Let's see, there we go. Ron is 46 years of age, married, resides in Old Hickory, Tennessee. He's in his own business. He's in the flooring business, and he had a positive alien abduction history, and his area of concern is the left wrist. Now, this is a very, very, very interesting, important case, because when he and his two friends were 9 to 10 years of age in this very small town of Tennessee, they decided to go not too far from home camping overnight. So they went into this kind of isolated field, and these kids didn't even have a real tent as we have today. They had a makeshift tent with poles that they put together with blankets and so on. And they were going to spend the night there, and they had a little campfire going and so on, and doing what the kids do, an exciting night out camping. And then sometime during the night, this bright cone of light shines down over them, and they find themselves floating in the air. Now, we did regressive hypnosis. Yvonne did a wonderful job. It took 2 sessions to break through the block with this gentleman, but when we finally got through the block, we were able to get some absolute fascinating information. It almost sounds like one of the typical Bud Hopkins cases. So here's the 3 kids, and they're now floating up into this bluish-white cone of light with this craft up above, typical, saucer-type thing. And, I kind of placed myself in that position at my age. Now, if somebody had lifted me off this stage while I'm standing here and I was floating, what do you think my reaction would be? No. I say at my age, I'd be scared to death I was going to fall. I mean, wouldn't you? Unless you're all of a different ilk. But I think I was going to fall over. You're floating up in the air. I don't want to fall down and break my hip. So, but these kids, you see, at 9 or 10 years of age, are floating up and they're having fun. They're laughing. Woo! Isn't this fun? They don't question where what the light's coming from or what that thing is over their heads. So they get into the ship, and they describe, or Ron describes, they're in a very large round room, and he has his experiences with these I call them the bumper sticker guys, the ones with the big heads and the big eyes and rotten-looking bodies. The grays, the typical bumper sticker grays. So they're there, and of course they're all mystified in what they're doing there, and now they're beginning to have a little bit of concern. But the concern, incidentally, is more for each other than for themselves. Now, Ron said he was very concerned. He had really not that much concern about himself, but he was concerned about his buddies, the 2 other kids. So they finally are separated, and Ron asked where they're going, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, they'll be just fine. We're going to take you back soon, and nothing to fear. Everything is just wonderful." So Ron was taken down a corridor of the craft, and we asked him under hypnosis what he saw, and he said there was a lot of individual rooms that he looked into while going down this one room. And we asked him what the rooms looked like, and he said, "Oh, it looked like a doctor's office." But he still wasn't afraid of anything. And the fear only hit him when the separation anxiety hit. He was separated from the other 2. And then he was placed in a room and was on either something that came out from the wall or some table that was constructed of a pedestal. And I remember certain things going on, and the implant being put into his wrist. Then they were all taken back, put back as they were at the campsite. And what happened next was something that I have never seen in the abduction literature. But I've talked to Bud Hopkins and to David Jacobs and John Carpenter and a few other people, and they've had a few cases. These kids were ravenously hungry, and they must have been given some kind of suggestion, because the first thing that they did was they ran out into a neighbor's vegetable garden, tore up the vegetables, and started eating them. Now, I don't know any kids that have that much lust for fresh vegetables out of the garden, do you? So they devoured the vegetables, and shortly after that, the sun was coming up, so that was the end of the camping trip. Now, when Ron came to California, he brought one of the other fellows with him. His name is Don, and Don, we tried to do hypnotic regression, and we just could not get past the block. But we think that we can accomplish this at a later date. Now, Don does have some descriptions of the craft that Ron doesn't remember. Ron has a very good description of what the undersurface look like. Ron doesn't have that kind of memory. Now there's a third kid that was involved, and he still lives in the local area down there, and we plan in the future to make a trip down and do the hypnosis again, and perhaps the other two also might have an implant. So when I tell you this is an extremely interesting case, it's extremely interesting from many standpoints. 3 individuals involved in the same case. One we know has an implant. The other 2 may have an object. The surgery was performed April the 24th. We filmed it with stills and video. It was the subject of Jaime Maussan's program in Mexico. You know, he has a program much like 2020, except involving UFOs. It was also shown on Telemundo, which is the largest Spanish-speaking network in the world. It's owned by NBC. And it was one program of the Casa Sorado series. Unbelievably, to this date, I do not have a copy. But I talked to Jaime today, and he said that by next month he will have copies for all of us. It was another very well-done program. We had multiple witnesses who all signed forms. Again, we used a C-arm. The surgeon in this case is a general surgeon that works with us, Dr. John Matriciano, very well credentialed surgeon in Thousand Oaks at the Los Robles Regional Medical Center. I was the assistant many times. Even though it's in the foot, I don't do these surgeries myself because of all the needs and various things that are going on. I have to sort of direct the action, so to speak. So if I'm scrubbed in as assistant and somebody needs me, I can get out of the room or do what I have to do without interfering with the case. Anesthesia was a local. We used 2 anesthetics mixed together. One is a long-acting anesthetic mixed with a quick-acting anesthetic. And the results are really quite good. The patient feels absolutely nothing and it doesn't wear off for a long time. Excuse me. Okay, the specimen, as I told you, was about 3 to 5 millimeters in length, and it came out in fragments. It was surrounded by this membranous or tissue that went around the object and sort of kind of divides it from the surrounding tissue. And it was stored in, as I told you also, in a container of the patient's own blood serum. We did ultraviolet examination of the patient. We did not go to his house, so we didn't examine anything there. But we looked at the arms, hands, feet, neck, face. He had multiple areas of fluorescence. And these varied in colors from blue to green. Now, one of the things that we don't know how long this had been there, the client didn't know. Nobody ever used an ultraviolet lamp on this fellow before. But on his arm was a large, like a chevron type insignia. How big was that, Steve?
That was about 4 or 5 inches tall and about 3 or 4 inches wide.
About 4 or 5 inches tall and about 3 to 5 inches wide, which is a pretty good sized symbol to have on your arm. And I mean, it was as plain as day, and we did film it, but he had no idea that it was there at all. We don't know what that means, but we have seen other individuals who have had marks on them, and also some strange markings on the walls of abductee houses. And as I told you, since he lives in Tennessee, we did not go there to examine the residence. We intend to do that sometime in the future. I told you also that he had the 3 young friends. They were all between 9 and 10 years of age. 2 of these individuals have gone hypnotic regression, and the third has not. But props in the future. The testing, as we do with most of the cases now, as long as we have the money and the ability to do them, we do optical microscopy. You know what that is. You take the object and you put it under a light microscope, and then you take a look at it. We look at the surface as good as we can do before we start looking inside. Then we use a scanning electron microscope to look at the surface features and start to look below and in depth to see how it's put together. And also we do what's called EDX, and we can determine the basic constituents of what makes this object up metal-wise. ICP-MS we use for trace elements. There's another spectroscopy test called Raman spectroscopy, which Steve will explain to you. And then the pathology tests are done on not only the object, the soft tissue that's in the object, but all the surrounding material itself. So we're going to probably get into the scientific aspect now, and I'll try and run this back. Okay, and with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our Chief Scientist for ANS Research, Steve Colburn.
Hello, it's a pleasure being here tonight, and I'd just like to say that it's been an incredible ride working with Roger. I've been working with Roger for about 2.5 years now, and I've analyzed several of the objects that he's removed over the years, including the two that are in this presentation, and there's just an incredible difference between strongly suspecting that something like this is true and knowing for sure, and I feel like I know for sure at this point. It is completely world changing. It's completely changes the paradigm with which you view the world, knowing that this information is really the truth. And John Smith pretty much said the same thing when he first saw the X-ray of the object in his toe. He knew he was going to see something, but he told me that when he did, it changed his world forever. And I think that we need to get this information out to the general public and let people know that that there is a much larger world out there beyond what the standardized, sanitized textbooks and the media and government are telling us. And so, without further ado, we could go into the analysis of the objects. Well, anyway, with these objects, the first thing that I would do upon receiving the object would be to do optical microscopy. That's the least invasive thing and easiest thing to do, and you'd want to do that before you do anything else. And in the case of the Ron Noel object, I dissected off the tissue capsule that was surrounding it and subjected that to a further test, which we'll get into later. There was a strange oil in the tissue surrounding the object, and we wanted to do tests on that to find out what it was, and what it was quite interesting. The next test is scanning electron microscopy, and you can get a much higher magnification view of the metallic portion of the object using this technique. And at the same time, you can do energy dispersive X-ray elemental analysis, which gives you the bulk composition of the object. And you follow that up with inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry rather, ICP-MS. And that is a much more sensitive technique that gives you the composition of the object as far as the trace elements are concerned in parts per million concentrations. And it was quite a synchronicity that I work in the carbon nanotube field, and it just so happened to turn out that these objects contain carbon nanotubes, probably as the electronics of the devices, and I have access to a Raman spectrometer, which is one of the main instruments that's used for detection of carbon nanotubes. And these objects gave quite quite large carbon nanotube signatures, as I'll point out in a moment. And of course, we had the pathology reports done on the objects to show that they had no inflammation, which is a highly unusual thing. I mean, it's almost unheard of, or it is unheard of, for human-made objects put into the human body to not produce any type of a reaction at all. The immune system always reacts to the presence of a foreign body, except in the case of these alien implants. The aliens apparently have the technology to completely circumvent the immune response, and if we had this technology, we could greatly enhance our organ transplantation and medical technology in general. The particles were magnetic, and that might have accounted for them reassembling in their original order, but a standard magnet will not do that. So that was extremely odd. The type of magnetism that these objects put out, as well as the type of magnetism that Roger was referring to in John Smith's house and abductees' houses in general, is not the same as a standard magnet would put out. It seems to be monopolar, one pole stronger than the other, and it will magnetize things that don't normally magnetize, like plastic and wood. Quite unusual. The magnetic fields tend to decay over a period of weeks, but the fact that it magnetizes things that don't normally magnetize at all is quite remarkable. As Roger pointed out, the John Smith object broke into about 11 pieces on removal, and the reason for that turned out to be the presence of these micron-sized inclusions that acted as stress points. And the inclusions turned out to be made of carbon nanotubes, amazingly enough. And carbon nanotubes, just to let you know, they're tiny cylinders of carbon, which were only discovered on this planet in 1991. And they're a very hot topic in material science right now because they have very, very interesting and potentially useful electronic properties. They can be used as electronics to make transistors, diodes, and such. And they're also the world's strongest known material and can be used to impart extreme mechanical strength to objects. And we're working on that in earthly science now. And it's my hypothesis that these carbon nanotubes in this device acted as the electronics, a micro-miniature nanoscale electronic system that is probably faster than anything that we have on Earth. And this is one of the pieces of the object. The red is rust, basically, because it turned out to be made of meteoric iron, which, as you probably know, rests in the Earth's atmosphere. So the red is iron oxide. And it was black at first, like Roger pointed out, because iron oxide is black until it hydrates. It hydrates slowly over a period of hours to days. And this shiny surface was quite unusual, and that later turned out to be something similar to mother of pearl or bone or some biological hard part. Extremely unusual object. And this shows the similarity of the object to an oxidized nickel-iron meteor. This is part of the Campo del Cielo nickel-iron meteorite from Argentina, I believe. And the oxidation surface is quite similar to what we see in the John Smith object piece. This is an SEM, scanning electron microscope image of the same piece of the John Smith object at 40,000 and 75,000 times magnification. And you'll see these fibers. Those look suspiciously like carbon nanotube bundles. I've seen them many times in the course of my day job research. And indeed, they did turn out later to be carbon nanotube bundles, and I believe I have a comparison slide here to commercially available carbon nanotubes. Here's the top images are an inclusion that was seen in the implant inside the metallic portion of the John Smith implant piece, and the bottom two images are commercially available. Oh, thank you. The bottom two images are commercially available single-wall carbon nanotubes, and the carbon nanotubes are actually smaller than this. They form bundles. They stick together by van der Waals interactions very strongly, and they look extremely similar to what we see here in this inclusion. And that doesn't prove they were the same thing, but later we did prove they were the same, that they were carbon nanotubes with the Raman spectroscopy, which is, as I say, the main technique that's used to show the presence of carbon nanotubes in this type of research. And these carbon nanotubes, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but these carbon nanotube bundles turned out to be coated with material that was either very similar to or identical with the shiny coating that we saw earlier on the outside of the John Smith piece, perhaps as insulation, if indeed they are electronics. We also found some very unusual structures inside the metallic portion of the piece, nanocrystals that were very regular in size and shape, and they turned out to be through EDX. You could see a discoloration there that were an EDX scanning beam hit that shows the elemental composition. These turned out to be sodium chloride crystals with some sulfate in them, apparently. And the unusual thing is that sodium chloride crystals are never this regular and seldom this small, and they're also cubic in shape, and these are orthorhombic. So something happened to these crystals to alter their crystal structure. We hypothesized that perhaps these crystals were the source of the radio waves that we saw. They may have been used to produce various frequencies of radio waves, like some of the old crystal sets. At least that's one hypothesis we came up with. And these pits were all over the metal as well, and they may also have some function along those lines, putting out various frequencies. But there might be many other possibilities as well, but that's probably one of them. And these appear to be deliberately introduced nanostructures. I've never seen anything like this before, or even heard of anything like this before. This is quite remarkable. The evidence was pretty clear that this was a nano-engineered device rather than just an object that somebody stepped on or something to that effect. It was inserted in patient Smith for a definite purpose and is indeed a device. Here's some other shots that a colleague of mine, Alex Mosier, who used to be a coworker of mine, took with Dr. Lear at Seal Labs, and they found these strange pores in the metal that almost look like they may have been passageways for capillaries from the tissue to go into the metal. If so, then perhaps it's a port in the device to allow real-time analysis of the patient's blood. At least that would be my best guess as to the function of it. And we see these nano ribbons, for lack of a better term for them. I've never seen anything like these before either. Those also appeared to be mostly carbon, so I hypothesize that they may have been large carbon nanotube bundles, but we weren't too sure about that. But in any event, they're something that is unknown to have been seen before. Here's a couple other images of the metallic pores from Seal Labs, and here's a very high magnification shot. That's I guess about 6,000 times. So these were like small micron-sized pores. They're not nano-sized, they're about the size of a typical capillary. Here's the Raman data for the John Smith object, and here we have the D and G band signature of commercial carbon nanotubes. These are single-wall carbon nanotubes from the CSI Corporation, and right about almost exactly the same wave numbers are what look like a D and G band from the metal. And we also see what we call radial breathing mode bands. I know this is something that a lot of scientists haven't even seen because this is a very narrow field, but these are radial breathing mode bands for carbon nanotubes, where the carbon nanotubes are going like this, and this signature is from the individual carbon atoms stretching. So this technique uses a laser, and it's kind of similar to infrared spectroscopy in what you can see, but different bands of the molecules show up. Bands that are inactive in infrared are often active in Raman, and this is a very useful technique in detecting carbon nanotubes. And here's a signature of iron oxide from stainless steel, and the brown trace is from the Campo del Cielo meteorite, just for comparison. So this peak here is probably not carbon nanotubes, it's probably from some component of meteoric iron, but these four peaks appear to be radial breathing mode carbon nanotube peaks, and the diameters of these things are pretty small compared to a lot of the commercially available ones, because the diameter is inversely proportional to the wave number of the radial breathing mode. So these are very small. These are less than a nanometer in diameter. That's less than 10 atoms across. These are very, very tiny structures. So along with the SEM, this is a pretty definite identification of carbon nanotubes in this object. And we found some more interesting things in the ICP-MS analysis. It turned out to be meteoric iron. It was mostly iron. The metallic portion was mostly iron. We dissolved this piece in acid and analyzed the acidic portion that was dissolved. And it turned out there was a lot of gallium and germanium, several hundred ppm of both. And that's pretty much a smoking gun for it being meteoric iron. And it had a nickel percentage of about 5.2%, and that's also very characteristic of a class of nickel iron meteorites called hexahedrites. And it was very similar to some of the nickel iron meteorites that you find in our solar system, and in trace element composition at any rate. It had a lot of the precious metals in it. These things often have a lot of iridium, platinum, palladium, ruthenium, and it had some rare earths in it as well, like praseodymium, europium, and cerium. And it also had some thorium and uranium, which that's a little unusual. You don't usually see that in meteorites. But it was definitely meteoric iron. There was pretty much no doubt about that. Meteoric iron is actually pretty strong, but as I say, these carbon nanotube inclusions were fairly large, micron size, and they acted as stress points. If you put a substance in a metal that doesn't bind to the metal, and the agglomerates are large enough, it actually weakens the metal, and that's what made it brittle, and it broke when Dr. Matriciano tried to pull the object out. And it was not strong enough to withstand that and broke into pieces as he was trying to pull it out with surgical instruments. And here's the very interesting part that indicates that this metal did not come from our solar system. Every element on Earth has a certain pattern of isotopes. Isotopes are nuclei that have different numbers of neutrons and therefore different atomic weights. And every element on Earth, some elements have a lot of different isotopes and some have only a few or only one, but the ones that have more than one isotope have a set pattern of ratios of one isotope of that element to the other. And in elements heavier than carbon, they only vary by a fraction of a percent, maybe 0.5% at most. If it varies by much more than that, then it's definite that it came from off the Earth. And even meteorites that came from our solar system do not vary from the earthly isotopic ratios by anywhere near this much. We're seeing percentages of variation of well over 2%. I believe we saw one here that was more like 3% with the case of magnesium-26. We analyzed, the data allowed us to do the analysis on boron, magnesium, nickel, and copper. And here we're seeing a 3% variation in copper-63 and 3% in copper-65. So that was extremely telling. We'd like to repeat these results when we get the money in a dedicated isotopic test. These were results from the ICP-MS raw data. But these results have been also seen in independent analyses of various UFO-related materials that have come to light. So I think these results are definitely real. And Dr. Kuntz, our colleague, did an analysis of this isotopic abundance and came to the conclusion that from the boron data that this came from a solar system that began its evolution approximately 80 million years in advance of ours. So there's a pretty good chance that these things come from a very long distance away. My first thought when I saw this data was that perhaps this material came from closer to the galactic core, where there were higher mass supernovas that produced isotopes with preferentially with more neutrons, heavier isotopes. And here's our scientific conclusions about this object. The iron appears to be meteoric in origin, and there's numerous features in the implant, such as biological tissue, sodium chloride orthorhombic nanocrystals of varying size, and carbon nanostructures like nanofibers, nanoribbons, nanotubes, and unknown structures and networks like the pores in the metal that you saw in the SEM shots. And the similarity to biological material of the outer coating may be responsible for the patient's lack of immune response to the object. That and also had a gray outer membrane that Roger's seen on a lot of his implants, implant removals in the past. And that gray outer membrane appears to be electrically conductive proteinaceous membrane that's very tough to cut through, that may be the interface between the device itself and the nervous system. The main connections to the device, I don't know if we show shots of them here. If not, then you'll see some in the case of the Noel object. The main connections to the device appear to be large carbon nanotube bundles, like little wires almost, about 10 microns in diameter. And those apparently connect to the gray outer membrane in the case of implants like the John Smith object. The Ron Noel object was a little bit different and did not have the gray outer membrane, but did have strange tissue that had oil vesicles within. The non-metallic phase, the coating is high in carbon, oxygen, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, and sulfur, and is present as an outer covering on or as inclusions in the sample. And the non-metallic phase also contains bundles of carbon nanotubes, and they appear to be covered with calcium and magnesium silicates, phosphates, and sulfates. And again, I think that's probably insulation, because I think these carbon nanotubes perform the function of electronic components, nanoelectronic components. And the inclusions have unusual shapes which suggest artificiality and functionality, And this, along with the fact that the object was emitting radio signals before removal, strongly indicates that this is a manufactured nanotechnological device having a definite purpose and not some piece of metal that was stepped on. And the isotopic ratios have been compared to known isotopic ratios of elements in our solar system, and as I say, they're not the same, so this material may not be from the solar system. It probably originated a long distance away. Now for surgery number 16, the raw Noel object. I'll skip all this. Roger already discussed that in great detail. These fluorescent colors, by the way, we're doing an ongoing project into finding out what these things are and what their chemical composition is. And there's a blue dye that's like a bright cobalt blue, and there's green, a yellow-green color that I have reason to believe comes from their skin. The blue dye appears to be some sort of a marker dye, and there's also an orange dye that also appears to be some kind of a marker dye, although that's speculation at this point. We need more data. And we basically did the same type of analysis on this object, except for the infrared spectroscopy done on the dried tissue that was surrounding the object. And here we see the object just after removal at 40 times magnification, and it had this capsule of tissue around it with these yellow vesicles that turned out to be of a strange oil. And here's a blood vessel here, and there were proprioceptor nerves all throughout this volume, but it lacks the gray outer membrane that Roger has seen so often in previous removals. And this tissue was subsequently, after dissection off of the inner metallic object, dried and subjected to Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy to try to find out what this oil was. And I'll get into that in a minute. But here's the inner metallic object, and it had a coating on it. This black is black non-hydrated iron oxide, and it's got this shiny coating that turned out to be very similar to, over the oxide, that turned out to be very similar to what we saw on the John Smith object, similar to a biological hard part. A lot of silicon, phosphorus, and sulfur in it. And here's the metallic object, metallic portion of the object at higher magnifications, and here's 100 times, 200 times, 500 times, and these pits were extremely interesting. These pits in this cottage cheese type surface were all over this the surface of the object, and that appeared to be some sort of a manufactured thing as well, since these structures were much too uniform to be naturally occurring. I'd never seen anything like that either. It was just mind-blowing. After one really interesting thing is, after removal from the tissue, the object was cut in half. We wanted to image the interior of the object with SEM to see if we could see anything in the metal itself. And I tried to cut it using Dix, and that didn't work. And finally, I tried to file, and that didn't work either. And so I called Roger and said, "Roger, I can't cut this thing." And so he took it to a machine shop, and they tried diamond tools, and diamond tools would not cut it. So I suspected at that point the material was an advanced iron carbon nanotube metal matrix composite, which actually we're trying to achieve here in earthly science, in earthly material science. The machine shop said it was the hardest stuff they'd ever seen, and it appeared much harder than anything I've ever seen before in my life. And the object was successfully cut, finally using a high-power laser, but I was starting to have my doubts whether even that would do anything to it, but it did cut it in half successfully. And here you see half of the object after the cut, and the laser did a nice job in cutting it. But the metal was pretty much featureless. There were no relatively large inclusions in it like there were in the John Smith object. The nanotubes appeared to be dispersed very evenly in the metal, very on a nano scale rather than a micron scale, as with the John Smith object. Here's one of these nanofiber bundles I was talking about that appeared to be the main connections to the device. They're about 10 microns across and extend for several millimeters sometimes in some of the ones I've seen. And the coating kind of had a rough surface and had these pits that were quite regular in shape and all over the outside of the coating, and some cracks as well. I don't know if those were originally there or were a result of drying, but there were some cracks. Here's one of the connections at a lower magnification, and that's part of the coating that is still adhering after the cutting operation. And here's a good shot of one of the pits and some grooves that were on part of the coating, and a very unusual shell-like structure. We didn't see this in the John Smith object. And here's a close-up of one of the pits. They have these central things like a central peak of a crater from the moon or something. I'm not sure what that's all about. But these look somewhat similar to some of the pits we saw in the metal of the John Smith object, but not the same. But in the John Smith object, this was in the metal, but in this object, it was in the coating. So these two objects appear to most likely have different functions, and they were also found in different areas of the body, so that also implies that they had different functions. And here's the Raman data from the Ron Noel object. This is Raman of a cut edge, so this is looking directly into the metal. And it must have a fairly high concentration of carbon nanotubes because the signal was pretty strong, actually stronger than in the John Smith object. And again, we see the radial breathing mode peaks, and there's some CNTs in here that apparently have a diameter somewhat larger than the commercial nanotubes, and then some that are slightly smaller. So that's a little bit different than the John Smith object as well. The carbon nanotubes are larger in diameter, and they were, like I say, quite well dispersed in the metal. It was impossible to make them out on SEM, but they were detected quite nicely with Raman. Here's the infrared analysis. Didn't turn out too well, but here's the infrared analysis of the oil in the vesicles in the tissue. And these peaks correspond to molecular vibrations that absorb infrared photons, and you can use these infrared spectral patterns to identify various compounds. And we did that in this case. We had the company that did this run the spectrum through their database, and it was most similar to coconut oil, surprisingly, and it's quite unusual for that to occur in the human body, and it never occurs in the human body since it's a vegetable product. It contained high concentrations of lauric acid. It, to me, looked, we didn't get a positive identification of what it was. In fact, it's probably not a pure compound, but it appeared most similar to me to either a trilauric ester of trilaurate compound, a trilaurate fat, or a dilaurate with some other fatty acid. And the interesting thing is that coconut oil has antibacterial properties, so we're thinking that perhaps this oil was placed around the object in order to prevent infection of any kind. And it may also function to prevent the immune response. I found that quite interesting, that it had antibacterial properties. And this object consisted mostly of iron, and it had manganese, silicon, chromium, nickel, phosphorus, copper, aluminum, calcium, but it was not meteoric iron, surprisingly. So this was apparently a manufactured alloy of some kind that it was not lying around in nature for them to pick up as meteoric iron would be. It also contained traces of molybdenum, tin, cobalt, zinc, arsenic, and it had some gallium and germanium. So there's a possibility that it could have contained some meteoric iron as one of the components, but much less than implant number 15's metal for sure, maybe 5 to 10% I calculated. And manganese and chromium and molybdenum are very effective hardening agents for steel, so that might have been part of the reason this stuff was so strong too, but it was far stronger than any alloy I'd ever seen before. As I say, it appears to be an advanced carbon nanotube iron alloy composite. The conclusions are that the Raman spectroscopy and SEM indicated the presence of carbon nanotubes. The signal is even stronger than with the John Smith object, and the concentration must have been fairly high because if they're dispersed, the better they're dispersed, the lower the signal in Raman. And it's pretty certain that they must function as nanoelectronics because otherwise the objects could not have been emitting radio waves. Both of them were emitting radio waves prior to removal, and a couple of the frequencies turned out to be deep space communication frequencies. And it appears to be a manufactured iron alloy carbon nanotube metal matrix composite, and the CNTs probably account for most of the extreme strength, and some of the other alloying ingredients as well probably accounted for a little bit of that. And the outer covering on the object is high in the same elements that were present in the coating on the John Smith object, and it appears to be a very similar coating and most likely functions in some way to also mitigate the immune response. The coating contains pits and nanofibers, and these are probably related to the function of the device. And the nanofibers may be CNT wires. On the next removal, I'd like to do micro-Raman on one of the CNT wires itself to prove definitively that those are CNT wires. But they certainly look like that's what they are, and all the other rest of the fibers in these devices were carbon nanotubes. And the presence of the nanostructures, carbon nanotubes, protective oil vesicles, and nerve fibers growing into the object indicate that this is also a manufactured nanotechnological device. There were plenty of proprioceptor nerves in the tissue bundle surrounding this object. And there are similarities to object number 15, but this is definitely a different type of device, and it probably has a completely different function. I'd hypothesize that the John Smith object may have been some sort of health monitoring device to have the aliens, help the aliens monitor the state of John Smith's health and chemicals in his bloodstream in real time. This object probably, I would think, had a function more along the lines of transmitting information on what the subject was doing. And this is a letter from Dr. Robert Kuntz, as I say, stating his conclusion that the John Smith material came from a stellar system that was roughly 100 million years more advanced in its evolution than our own. And this was pretty much a smoking gun. And Dr. Kuntz somehow, I'm not too clear on how he did this, but he calculated he calculated a distance in the galaxy using these numbers, and so he was talking about galactic distances. You know, we're probably talking thousands of light years here anyway. And do you know what distance scale he was talking about, Roger?
Relationship drawn between the isotopic decay and the age of the universe. How long it took to get
Yeah, he didn't say a specific distance here, but in any event, it's thousands of light years he's talking about. He had some way of calculating that using the fine structure constant, and he's more of an astronomer than I am, but anyway, we're talking thousands of light years. So the implants probably came from, I would think, closer to the center of the galaxy, judging by the isotopic analysis of the John Smith object. We have not gotten isotopic analysis from the Noel object as yet. Here he's got a number, 300,000 light years is a good guess, he says. So that's quite a long distance. That's larger than the size of our galaxy, I believe. 200,000? So yeah, it might have come from another galaxy according to his calculations. It's hard to say, but yeah, we're talking a long distance away. I think that's you can safely say that anyway. Not just a few dozen light years, thousands of light years. But anyway, that's about it. So.
Okay, let me see how much time we have left. Oh, I certainly have time to sum this up, I believe. Steve went over a lot of intricate scientific points, and I'm sure you all got all of them. So we'll be passing out some papers. They have a few questions. We'll grade them, and we'll see if you know what a CNT is, and what is the structure of meteoric iron, and ICP-MS, and those few things. What are orthorhombic sodium chloride crystals? Anyway, we don't expect everyone to get a total understanding, other than the fact to say that these objects are not just objects that you find in nature. They're manufactured, and they're highly complex, and we've just scratched the surface. To gain more knowledge, it takes more time and it takes more funds. We're trying to do that. So let's sum this up at the end. Now, Steve told you the calculations of Dr. Robert Kuntz, who has a minor in astronomy but is a PhD in nuclear physics. We have 2 PhDs on our science advisory board, as well as a number of other material scientists. Basically, what Dr. Kuntz is saying, that these materials that these objects are made of come from not less than 80 million light years away. And as Steve said, and we all agreed, that's a long distance. It's almost an inconceivable distance. Taking something from our grandfather, Stan Friedman, who one time says, if you live in New York, you wouldn't necessarily go to New Jersey to buy a loaf of bread. Well, we can apply Stan's theory to this situation. If the materials come from not less than 80 million light years away, then it's fairly safe to say that whoever is making them comes from approximately the same area. If we traverse the known universe, and I say known universe, or our conception of the universe, in the way that human science has been looking at it, we would be traveling for more than a lifetime, or we'd have to look at some other way to get there. However, with advanced technologies, and we're learning too, academic science is learning that there's things that can be done not only theoretically, but on a practical basis in a laboratory, where you don't have to travel through linear time to get from point A to point B. And without going into all the possibilities, there's plenty of information about this on the net. To make this even a little more complex, the latest figure I got on the black budget, do you all know what the black budget is? How many do not know what the black budget is? All right. The black budget is the money that's allocated by some branch of the United States government for secret defense of the United States. This money is supposed to be used for research and development of materials and weapons to keep us safe, no matter what the factors are involved. The interesting thing, and why it's gotten the name the black budget, is this is all your money. Not mine. I don't make enough to pay taxes. But it's all your money, and it's not accountable to the GAO. It's a General Accounting Office. The last figure I got on the black budget was a mere $93 trillion, $93 trillion. Now, with $93 trillion, even if you trickle this down by going backwards, if you look at the time that the black budget's been in place and you apply this, let's say, to the material that was gathered at Roswell, we've had a long time to back engineer and develop things that are far beyond even our own conjecture of what we think we can do. Paul Violet, who has been on the lecture circuit now for some time, if you ever get a chance, go in and listen to what he has to say. He worked in the black budget. There's certain things he can talk about and certain things he can't. One of the statements he made, and it's in his book, is that we have had the technology to take ET home at least 20 years ago. And with the advances in anti-gravity materials and what we've used and back engineered, he claims that we are at least 100 years ahead of what academic science knows. This has all been hidden from us, like everything else. You know, if you stop and think about it, you can really get a big headache. We don't know where we came from. We don't know what our evolution was, and I believe there is such a thing as evolution, but it's not the kind where you've crawled out of the slime. We don't even know what we're composed of. But some ET races, if not all of them, have a better understanding of what we are than we do. I have a book which we have back there, which is in my investigation of the Virginia, Brazil case, which was a crash similar to Roswell, which occurred in a small town of about 130,000 people in Brazil in 1996, made the front page of the Wall Street Journal with an article entitled "Stinky Aliens Land in Brazil." A little bit tongue-in-cheek on the first page, but on the second and third pages, it stayed with the case. It was one of the most interesting cases of modern time. More emphasis was placed on the beings in this case than there was on the craft. In Roswell, we know we paid a lot more attention to what the craft was and what happened to it and so on. In the Brazil case, there was a lot more attention paid to the ETs. One was operated on by an orthopedic surgeon in one of the local hospitals in Virginia, and I met with this gentleman and through an interpreter and the use of strictly medical language. He told me quite a bit about the ET he was forced to operate on with a fracture of the leg. He said something that was so prophetic and thought-evoking that I'd never forget it. It's written in the book. He said they felt sorry for us as humans. And he asked them, this was a telepathic conversation, he asked them, why do you feel sorry for human beings? And he was told that we could do everything that they could do, but we didn't know how to do it. And as an example, he said, I would not need to be in a specialized facility or have a specialized individual in a field of training to heal what is wrong with my body. We could do it either singularly or join together. The other reason that they felt sorry for human beings was that he said we are totally detached from our spiritual self. Now, if you stop and think about that, like I said, we don't know what we are. But this carcass we walk around in isn't the end. There is an energy, a soul, which I believe goes on. If you've ever heard Robert Dean talk about it, he's probably much more convincing on the subject than I am. So we have entities that are probably coming here from galactic distances. using advanced technologies that we can't conceive, and intermingling and interfering with the society of the Earth. For what purpose and how long has this been going on? They probably have been coming here for thousands of years as we look at the cave paintings and other artifacts that have been left behind. Many civilizations, human civilizations, have been here and are now gone. The visitations over and over again, if you look at the historical record and you look at it well, we may not be the same human being as something that was here 1,000,000 years ago, or the same society, or the same amount of knowledge. I heard folks talking about Zecharia Sitchin earlier. Zecharia was a wonderful man. He was a good friend of mine, and you have to remember that as a Sumerianologist, whether you believed him or whether you did not believe him, one of the things you can know for sure, he was never criticized by his peers. I defy anybody to tell me or show me a piece of literature where any other Sumerianologist or Egyptologist has said Zecharia Sitchin is wrong. He's had a couple of people who have changed a few things around that actually disagree with him. One was a fellow by the name of Allen, and he turned out to disagree with a few different things, but he was a student of Zecharia. So I suppose it's perfectly okay for a student to criticize something that he learned from the teacher. But the man wasn't wrong, and he said that 435,000 years ago, a race of beings came to the Earth called the Anunnaki. And with their head geneticist, Enki, they did gene splicing. They changed DNA around, and they entered their DNA with something that was quite primitive here at the time, most probably Neanderthal. And they made us. They made human beings. We're part of that same genetics. So I believe that one of the things that's going on, and I agreed to address this issue, which is all theoretical, but part of it is based on what we've been finding with abductees and the products, which are these tiny, tiny little things, the implants, that can give us a clue. I think that there is a group, and I'm not saying every group, but I think there is a group that's doing a mass DNA manipulation of the human race. We have a problem, and that problem is inborn in our DNA. We do things to each other which we shouldn't be doing, and we do things to this little beautiful blue ball that's spinning around in space that we shouldn't be doing. Are they altruists? No. Are they here to do us a favor? No. I think one of the things that we don't understand is what we do here affects something somewhere else. We don't understand it. In all practical sense, any atomic explosion that occurs either on the Earth or underneath it releases a magnetic wave, which leaves the Earth and goes for an infinite distance into space. That's a fact. That's not a theory. It's a reality. We don't know where the hell it goes. We don't know what it does. But maybe it's not such a good thing. So how do you stop this? If you look at Star Trek and you say, well, there's a prime directive, don't interfere with the already existing civilization. And maybe they shouldn't interfere. But then again, maybe covertly, they have been interfering for a long, long time. But one of the ways, and I look at things kind of a practical aspect, how do you change things to protect yourself or to protect Venus or to protect Orion? Who knows how far this goes? You may go in and genetically remanipulate the human being so we are a different species. And I've done a study on 17 functional growth characteristics in children over a period of 40 years. And we find some startling findings. And that is the kids that were born in the last 40 years, conservatively, have growth characteristics which are accelerated by 16 to over 80%. Now, I'm not talking about IQ. I'm talking about the age when a baby raises its head, when they can walk, talk, stair climb, simple speech, complex speech. All these things have been measured, and over a 40-year period, they've been accelerated from 16 to 40%. Now, I've been in 42 countries. I've talked about this with many parents and grandparents. I've never had an argument. If you just listen to what your kids or your grandkids say, don't question it, just listen to what they have to say. They're going to teach you something, because they're getting knowledge that's not out of a book, and it's not from the TV, and it's not from a newspaper. It's some knowledge they've got that comes from somewhere else, or some knowledge stream. And perhaps that is going to result in a total different behavioral pattern for the population of this world. Now, right now, one of the political fears globally is that Iran is going to have an atomic bomb, which probably is not such a good idea. But do you know that 75% of the population of Iran is less than 35 years of age? Do you know that the black market in Iran was one of the most powerful black markets that ever existed on the globe? Do you know that the average person has a wealth in Iran that far exceeds what it does in the United States? And these young people, no matter how much the government of Iran tries to suppress the internet, they can't do it. So these young people are communicating with people all over the world. And so let's not be so pessimistic as to think there's going to be a global nuclear war because Iran is going to have an atomic weapon. The change comes from within. And if we look at the whole world, it's one of the reasons for kind of looking up and maybe, thank heaven, we are being visited by somebody that may be a little bit smarter than us. So where do they come from? One of the reasons they're here, David Jacobs says, well, they're here making hybrids. Well, maybe they are here making hybrids. Maybe hybrids are sort of a last resort. Suppose we all do each other in. Maybe a hybrid civilization will come into play. I'm not saying they're not. But to me, it's far more complex than offering one solution of hybridization. I think that genetic manipulation, maybe hybrids, are a valid subject, but there are probably many other things. And do they all agree? They, meaning those from out there. I doubt it. And what is the collusion factor between the human beings who are in power and run the show, far surpassing governments, far surpassing private industry? What is the extent of the collusion going on? We don't know. We have been kept in the dark for many, many, many years. And I think it's about time to wake up and see the light. Talking about disclosure, I believe you shouldn't sit around and wait for disclosure, because I believe disclosure is happening as we sit here in the seat. Just turn around and look for it. It's happening right now, and it will intensify. We're going to know, the people of the world are going to know, and governments are going to admit it, that we are being visited. Now, if this may be good and it may be bad, because there's always that old thing about the false flag operation. Remember the Reagan what if speech for the United Nations? Clinton made also reference to the same thing. What if we had an enemy? We would all come together. And how are we all going to come together? One world government. So some of this, all I'm saying this for, is examples of what the possibilities are of the human collusion factor to add a mix that makes it far more complex.
Okay. I just want to thank you guys for coming out here to MUFON LA. You gave a great presentation. Groundbreaking. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to thank everybody for coming. You've been a great audience.